Dear members, friends, welcome. I'm Julia Stone. I'm with the Historical Society. I'm current historian's president. And it's my pleasure to introduce Phil Cantor, who's our speaker tonight, and he hardly needs any introduction. He's been with the Historical Society for many years and served as president. His research is extensive, and when you open your handout, you'll see how much he uses primary sources. So almost everything he says is supported by historic fact. I'll let you start.
Sure. Before I do start, there is handouts if you haven't gotten one. Might assist you in following along. Or not.
Are there any extras? Does anybody else want one? We hope in case somebody else comes in.
So, I'm Phil Cantor. I live at 12 River Street right here in Conway. This general topic, Ely's Insurrection, Joseph Hawley, has fascinated me for a long time. I'm particularly drawn to those time periods when it was palpable to everybody that all things were possible. The 1780s were one such thing. 1774 was another. And Joseph Hawley in particular, I've always been amazed at how he's a Northampton guy, a Western Mass guy, born and raised and died in Northampton, and how few of us know about him, and what we do know, how little we know about him, and just how central a figure he was in American history, and in particular, how his contemporaries viewed him as brilliant and as an intellectual father of the American Revolution. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about Joseph Hawley, and regrettably I'm just going to talk a little bit about his family tree, but it is amazing and it needs to be talked about. He's the third Joseph Hawley of Northampton. It's typical of continental research. The father, son, grandfather, great-grandfather, all named the same. So Joseph Hawley, the first one, arrived in Northampton in 1674, was straight from Harvard, was a preacher, teacher, lawyer, judge, Indian trader, died by being gored by his own ox in 1711. His Joseph Hawley's wife, the first Joseph Hawley, our Joseph Hawley's grandmother, died from suicide shortly after the 1704 Deerfield raid. They gave birth to the second Joseph Hawley, our Joseph Hawley's father. He, 19 years town selectman, town clerk, principal trader, cattle drover to Boston, land speculator, a useful and good man in the town of Northampton. During the First Great Awakening, and without getting too much into colonial ecclesiastical history, because probably I'm like the only one in the room that's interested in that, but his father died of suicide in May 1734 in a very public cutting of his own throat. Shortly after, he witnessed the first George Whitefield Great Awakening preachings, because he was so exceedingly concerned about the state of his own soul. He had scarcely any sleep at all for days and days beforehand. The coroner's inquest judged him delirious. But before he died, he married Rebecca Stoddard. Rebecca Stoddard was the daughter of the Reverend Solomon Stoddard, the Pope of Northampton. 60 years, the minister of Northampton, best friends with all the ministers that were part of the Salem witch trials. But he had had a conversion shortly after the Deerfield raid, where he changed from the standard Harvard Calvinist Puritanism to something that became called the Stoddardian method, which was he started baptizing babies. He started rejecting the doctrine of original sin, which was a big deal back then. And because in order to be baptized into the church back then, in the classical Puritan way, you had to have a personal conversion experience. You had to be able to convince a board on the church that you were saved by that personal experience. So babies, you couldn't get baptized. Rebecca Stoddard, the Stoddards had 11 and 12 kids. Rebecca Stoddard's brother was Israel Williams. Other brother was Elijah, was Ephraim Williams. We'll get to them in a little bit. But Rebecca Stoddard, the mom, got to talk about the mom. Mom was, they said, for a woman of the age, she was exceptionally well educated. Married the Joseph Hawley at age 36, very late. Had an aristocratic spirit, had traits of eccentricity. They said whenever she left the house, she either said or did something that set the village tongues a-wagging. And Joseph Hawley and Rebecca Stoddard had two boys, Joseph Hawley and Elisha Hawley. What I wanted to get across about Rebecca Stoddard is just how difficult a woman she appears in the pages of history. When Elijah was the younger of the two sons, was in the military most of the time, along with Israel. There was Israel Williams and his brother Ephraim Williams, which was Rebecca Stoddard's sisters. Their mother was Rebecca Stoddard's sister. Israel Williams was the monarch river god of Hampshire County. Everybody in these parts hated him. And it's hard to explain. The area militia on the eve of the Revolutionary War for 40 years was under the command of Israel Williams of Hatfield. If you were in the militia, you were commanded by Israel or his cousin William Williams. If you needed to buy something in Deerfield, the item in question was sold to you by the leading storekeeper, Elijah Williams. You ended up in court. The same Elijah was the justice of the peace. When you attended the Sabbath service in Deerfield, Jonathan Ashley, the Williams brother-in-law, was the minister. If you needed good bleeding, Brother Thomas Williams in Deerfield was the medical man. In all matters political, they were always supporters of the monarchy. In their social instincts and business practices, they were haughty and positively unjust towards the masses of men. In these parts, you had to deal with them every day. We didn't like them. But Ephraim Williams was the good Williams. And he most famously was the leader of the Bloody Scout in the French and Indian War in 1755. So he was a Deerfield selectman for years. The boundary stones on the 7-mile line, one of which is visible right from Hoosac Road that has his carved initials of E.W. But he was widely liked. And when he died, he donated his entire fortune to what became Williams College. He was widely liked. He died during the Bloody Scout, which was the French and Indian War, 1755. After 9 years of the French and Indian War, they really geared up to kick the French out of everything but Canada. And so the idea was to go up the Hudson River Valley, go up Lake George, take Fort George, take Crown Point at the entrance to Lake Champlain, take Ticonderoga, push the French all the way back. Right as they were around Lake George, they got word from their scouts that a large Indian ambush was right around there. Ephraim Williams and his second in command, Elisha Hawley, Joseph Hawley's younger brother, decided they were going to ambush the Indians. It didn't work out. They suffered a horrendous defeat, and both Ephraim Williams and Elisha Hawley were killed. And Ephraim Williams is the only Massachusetts or colonial militiaman that has his own memorial in Westminster Abbey because he saved so many British soldiers that day. But Mom, when Elisha Hawley, Joseph Hawley, our Joseph Hawley's younger brother, was home in the few years between he was wounded. He was the commander of Fort Massachusetts at the base of Mount Greylock, 46, 47, 48. He was wounded when the Indians stormed that and took that fort. He was previously wounded with shotgun blast to the leg. So he was home for a couple years. He falls in love. Mom finds out that he's in love. Mom decides that the girl in question is not a worthy social status enough. Mom forbids him from dating him. He keeps going over there. So Mom follows him over one day, bursts into the house, curses out the girl's parents, drags him out by the ear. He's 24 years old, wounded in and within a year, a scandal breaks out. A woman named by the name of Martha Root, who may or may not be buried in Howland Cemetery here at Conway. A woman by the name of Martha gave birth to twins. Said Elisha was the father, he gets arrested for fornication. He gets sued civilly by Martha Root's family, and he gets excommunicated from the Northampton Church. Joseph Hawley has to negotiate. Needed to pay a penalty of $150, but Joseph Hawley, in what he said was the worst thing he ever did, got him out of the excommunication by alleging that Martha Root was a woman of the town, and then begged Martha Root in a letter for apology, for forgiveness. She used that letter in court, in civil court, to get a better settlement. So our Joseph Hawley goes to Yale at the age of 16, graduates from Yale in 1742, signs on to be chaplain of the Mass Regiment during the siege of Louisburg, 1745. But he was shocked at the absence of religious sentiment among the soldiers. Turned him from ministry to the desire to practice law. Goes to Suffield, what's now Connecticut, was then Massachusetts, to study law with Phineas Lyman. Within 5 or 6 years, Phineas Lyman's brother, who had moved to Northampton, had a daughter. Our Joseph Hawley is smitten with her, courts her for years. Mom doesn't like her either. Mom says, okay, their family has the requisite social status, but you can't marry her because her face looks too much like a toasting iron. And so I knew when I read that was horrible. So I tried to find out just how horrible that was, on the continuum of Revolutionary War fireplace implements. Just how ugly is a toasting iron? And I saw all of what Google listed, and it's pretty ugly. But it didn't dissuade Joseph Hawley. He ended up marrying her in 1750, and good for him. Many of their love letters are at the Forbes Library. They're delightful to read. They really are. They called each other dear child. They closed every letter with may you always remember to be fearful of God. It's just an interesting way to close your letters.
How old was he when he was married?
So born in 17, close to 30. At that Bloody Scout, also at that Bloody Scout, in that same regiment, was Abel Dinsmore as a private. He was from Conway. Perez Bardwell, then a private from Conway, and Reuben Dickinson, then a sergeant. He had just received a battlefield promotion from Amherst. We'll get to them in Ely's Insurrection, but it's important just to know that they had an early connection with Joseph Hawley through being witnesses to his brother's death. So Joseph Hawley becomes a lawyer, practices in Northampton, all through Western Mass, is the first one to write rules of civil procedure for the courts in Massachusetts, in the country. Is the first one to write rules for the conduct of judges court rules in the country. It has already established a reputation as being an excellent lawyer. Which brings me to the first thing in your handout, the Berkshire Affair. And there's three reasons I want to talk about this. Number one, it shows Joseph Hawley's viewpoints on treason, which becomes important when we get to Healy's Insurrection. It's the thing that made him famous, not just throughout Massachusetts, but when they reprinted his letters to newspapers about the Berkshire Affair, he became famous all throughout the colonies. Thomas Jefferson took his reprinted, when the Richmond papers reprinted his letters, Thomas Jefferson actually bound them and saved them. And it shows just what a brilliant guy he was. So the Berkshire, I just want to get this over with in the beginning because it's the study of a case at law. So we're going to go to law school for a little bit, just to we can do this, it's just a few minutes. The Berkshire Affair grew out of the Stamp Act, and the Stamp Act, 1765, an act of Parliament said all legal affairs, all legal orders, everything, a legal piece of paper has to have the stamp from the British Crown. This was also the rise of Samuel Adams' political base. He prevented any of the stamps from being offloaded from the ships in Boston harbors, intimidated all the sailors in the boats, etc., etc. No stamps got off the boat. There were no stamps. The law said you needed stamps.
Of course, you had to pay for the stamps.
That was the whole purpose of it. This was one of the first, if not the first, attempt by the English Crown, Great Britain, to directly raise revenue in the colonies. They've been complaining about how much the colonies cost for years in the French and Indian War, which was really expensive. But we didn't pay for it, they did. So British law required stamps in all legal documents. It first came to its head in Lanesborough in Berkshire County. So the absence of stamps was particularly hard for debtors. Debtors who were put in jail for owing a debt. Without the stamps, you couldn't get a bond, which never cost very much, but you needed a bond to enjoy the limits of the jail yard. It was a continental concept where the debtor or the prisoner would generally be confined not to the jail, but to the limits of the entire town. And that way would be able to work for wages and pay off their sentence. So at a house raising, November of '65, the residents of Lanesborough decide they're not going to allow any more arrests for debt until a proper order, a proper writ, or a proper execution is given with a stamp. Otherwise, the debtors are stuck in jail. And it's not right because they're arresting people without the stamp. So that same night, sheriff visits the Lanesborough Village Tavern, and I was in Lanesborough not that long ago. I think they still only have one tavern. But they happen upon one John Franklin. They have an execution. They arrest him. They see a Peter Curtis. They have another writ. Neither writ had a stamp. Immediately the cry goes out. The sheriffs are here. The sheriffs are here. Big riot. Well, a big melee. Clubs, stones, etc. But nobody was seriously hurt. But it was serious enough that the sheriffs retreated to Pittsfield without their prisoners. So that was just the beginning. Spring of '66, grand jury indicts 10 men involved in the fracas of the past November. They come to trial in April. Of these 10, one of them, Seth Warren, had a lawyer. His name was Joseph Hawley. He pleads not guilty to the charge of riot. They find him guilty anyway. They sentence him to pay a fine of £3. Not that much. Pretty much a misdemeanor. But Hawley advises him to appeal to the Superior Court on the grounds that first, the writ was not stamped, the officer had no authority, the company was assembled together, they peaceably, it wasn't a riot, instead it was just a trespass, really nothing. And third, that you should consider the conditions within the province, that the Attorney General ought to have just decided to dismiss the charges. It goes. So it's in the docket for the appellate court. They fight their case. They make the same arguments. The Chief Justice in charge it's British Justice then as now. The judge in their charge to the jury tells the jury what in the United States the jury determines the facts, the judge determines the law. In England, it's almost the exact opposite way around. But the judge instructs the jury what he thinks they should find as to the facts. So this is British justice. The judge charges to the jury that in the opinion of the court, riot had occurred. Warren should be found guilty. The jury's charged in the late afternoon. They retire for the evening, and in the morning it's going to be verdict and sentence. At night, Hawley has a brainstorm. He says he wants to change Warren's plea from not guilty to riot to guilty of high treason. High treason is punishable by death. And he felt that with the new defense, Warren should either receive a dismissal or a dismissal and a new charge of treason, and he was confident that no jury would find him guilty of treason because it was such a minor affair. But he felt that it meets the definition of treason. It was a riot as a result of confederacy and agreement, etc. So the judge tells the jury that it's sound doctrine and clear law, but the jury still finds him guilty of riot, sentences him to pay the same small fine. So here's where the Berkshire Affair becomes a Berkshire Affair. It's the letters that Hawley makes and writes to the newspaper. And that had never been done before. Never had a lawyer, after the case was done, publish defense, a defense and an explanation of his position in court. And this is really significant because he, for the first time, broaches subjects that have never been broached before. He states that the Warren could not have been guilty of any crime. That the conditions in the province at the time of the Berkshire Affair, the entire population of Massachusetts was outlawed in the sense that they were deprived of the benefit of law without crime or offense of their own, because without the stamps, the king couldn't have jurisdiction, the writs couldn't be issued, and he argued that when positive laws, the laws in books, cease or are suspended, then the laws of nature must emerge and take place. So, which is common law, which implies that there is a power that is over and above that of Parliament. And up until that point, nobody had ever really said that still to this day, acts of Parliament are absolute. His published exploration of natural rights versus legal rights has this major effect. And it creates one of the first intellectual frameworks, sort of a scaffolding, that allows especially wealthy and educated people to consider the concept of independence separate from labels such as traitor or outlaw. The court didn't think that. When they next met, they disbarred Hawley, and which set off a whole fresh new storm of controversy. Hawley wrote a bunch of other letters. If every man's mouth is to be sealed up and nothing can be said about a court, then the trial is only as good as a Romish Inquisition. And he said he only knew of one tribunal, absolutely infallible, and that is not the said court. So,
Ask a question.
Yeah.
Did the defendant have the option to not do what his...
No, and so that I thought that the whole
what his
time.
attorney was advising?
If I'm Warren, I'm sitting there saying, "Wait a minute, I just got fined three pounds. Holy, shut up! You're high treason. Like, are you kidding me?" But
does the historical record have anything about the defendant saying, "I don't want to do that"? Or no.
But so why this is so important. The first person to broach an argument like this was James Otis in 1761. In that case, it was the general standing warrant, the famous every man is king of his own castle argument. The Crown issued general warrants which allowed any Crown official to enter any house and search for smuggled goods without having to go to a judge for any specificity whatsoever. Otis famously contended that warrant violated the natural principle of a man should be secure in his own house. That was 1761. He lost that argument, and he didn't really make it very coherently. But it was Otis's case that John Adams referenced in 1821 as when the child Independence was born, and within 15 years, i.e. 1776, had grown to manhood and declared himself free. But Hawley, in the Berkshire Affair letters, was credited at the time with taking Otis's idea to its logical extreme. Because after Otis's 1761 courtroom defeat, the general warrant was only ever issued a handful of times until 1767, when the Stamp Act stuff was going on, when the Berkshire Affair was going on. And they began to issue in great numbers, so the indignities of these general warrants were fresh anew in the minds of Massachusetts. So when Hawley published his letters, and he essentially justified the overthrow of parliamentary authority, and he first contemplated the establishment of a legislature with power that would be limited by fundamental laws, incorporating natural laws. In other words, limited by a constitution. And also first brought up the concept of judicial review of legislation, which eventually became the fundamental concept that the courts ultimately determined the law. So that's why it was like super important. And now we're done with law school, but I had to get but that's what put Hawley on the map. And when you follow that story along, his contemporaries were just in awe. This guy is brilliant. John Adams, in particular, followed this avidly, and at the end of it determined that he has to meet Hawley. He has to make his acquaintance. He'd been a lawyer for 15 years. He finds out that Hawley will be arguing cases in Springfield in March of '78. Adams stops what he's doing and goes to Springfield to meet Hawley, and introduces himself to Hawley and says, "Will you be my mentor? You're the first person I met that's smarter than me." And really, which he did. And so when I found out that John, and then when people were writing John Adams about their concerns about Ely's insurrection in 1782, John Adams replied, "I'm not."
Somebody's parked in the driveway right here. You need to move your car? Thanks.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Phil. Sorry.
That's all right. So when John Adams wrote in response to people's concerns that I've spent a whole winter in that area, in those towns, I've spent parts of 2 summers in that town, it was really to be with Joseph Hawley. I started to look at whether he had been to Conway. I'm the person that sort of proved that Samuel Adams came to Conway. Because Joseph Hawley was representing people from Conway at the time, and couldn't determine whether or not he was in Conway or not. But there's a couple of really good cases that Hawley had of people that would sue, that if they weren't already in Conway, they would be in Conway in a few years. Timothy Childs was sued by Thomas Williams, the doctor from Deerfield, and for not paying his doctor's bill. Timothy Childs' entire defense was the elixir and bolus in the plaintiff's account did me much harm and no good. So that's not much of a legal defense. Childs lost that case. Hawley won it for Dr. Williams. Another case was for Benjamin Leonard. At around the same time, Hawley represented Benjamin Leonard. Leonard's wife had broken her leg, and he engaged the services of a Mr. Cooper who held himself out to be a bone fixer. He came over to Leonard's house, set the leg in splints, and poured rum over the leg for 9 straight days. Needless to say, the leg did not get any better, but it did get better apparently on its own within a few months. But Benjamin Leonard was so stressed out that his wife might lose her life that he sued Cooper for the amount of 40 pounds. His case was thrown out for the inability to state a claim. So there's a couple of cases that I found going through the court records that Hawley represented. Conway-ish people. So we got to 1767. Also 67, Conway, the town of Conway was founded. Also Samuel Ely graduated from Yale himself. It was his second degree. 64, he graduated with a bachelor's degree. 67, he graduated with an ecclesiastical degree. But he was retained by Somers, Connecticut, as their priest as their minister starting in 65.
When Sam Adams met Joseph Hawley, how did they get along?
Actually, I have a letter in the packet about that. Sam Adams also was really impressed with Hawley. There is, I think, in the packet.
He asked him to be his mentor. I wonder
Yeah,
if it ever occurred.
I think it's like on page 2 or 3, the letter from Sam Adams to John Adams. And what happened right then is, following the trajectory that Hawley set out in the Berkshire Affair letters, the legislature of Massachusetts just declared that it's the common law of England, a rule of common law of England, that no countries but the ancient territorial realm, which did not include the American colonies, is constitutionally subject to the authority of England. So it was a major step towards independence, and it was just the logical trajectory that Hawley set out in the Berkshire Affair. And the letter from Sam Adams to John Adams is right after the royal governor publishes a long letter saying that the House has incautiously applied the rule of the common law, and that it's unsupportable under law. So Sam Adams is seeking guidance on strategy, and he has this line that, to tell you a secret, if there is a lawyer in the House of Representatives, in Major Hawley's absence, there's no one else whom I incline to confide in. So that's why I added that.
That's pretty highly.
Yeah, and that, which is, again, so. And the next is, so go to 1774. The 1774 was this enormous year in our history. It's when the royal governor Hutchinson just gets on a boat in the middle of summer, goes back to England, leaves a general in charge, but it's basically waving the white flag. We didn't really have a roadmap for what was going to come next. But we formed a provincial congress. They wanted Joseph Hawley to be the head of it. He declined. Hawley had started advocating for the need for a continental congress, for union of the colonies, and he starts writing to John Adams a lot. The little bit that I included here is just Adams proposing some ideas about what to communicate to the Continental Congress. The delegation, Massachusetts delegation of the Continental Congress, they wanted Hawley to lead it. Hawley declined to even go and recommended John Adams go in his stead. So John Adams is writing, has some ideas about what he should communicate to the Continental Congress, and I just like the way he closes his letter. He doesn't close letters like this to anybody else. But I beg your opinion as a very great favor. I am with great esteem and regard your friend and humble servant. So,
do you know why Joseph Hawley declined to go?
So John Adams said that it was for fear of contracting smallpox. And I'll get to this a little bit later on. Joseph Hawley was afflicted during his life for huge periods of time with what his contemporaries call mild insanity. We would call it clinical depression. When episodes came out, he was in his house, windows, curtains drawn for days, weeks, months, years on it. And but even once Continental Congress started, every few months John Adams was writing to Hawley saying, "You would be so much better than this at this than I am." And one of the letters that really fascinated me was John Adams' trouble with the Southerners, remarking how they're more concerned with protecting their special category of property than they are with our liberty and independence. And he had a great because he felt that the Virginians were great, but the Carolinians, the Georgians, many of their delegates were very quarrelsome. Even after something would be decided and voted on, they would still just another bite of the apple, another bite of the apple, always bringing something. It was so hard to get any business done because of their presence. And he felt Hawley would be better at dealing with those kinds of difficult personalities than he was. So,
Sorry, can I ask
Yeah,
a question?
yeah.
Sorry to backtrack a little bit, but both his father and his grandmother took their lives?
So we get to 1777, which is Samuel Ely. By then he's living in Conway, and the Battle of Bennington. Burgoyne's coming down from Canada. The destination is Albany. He's supposed to meet in a pincer movement. Howe's supposed to bring his army up from New York City. Barry St. Regis is supposed to come from west. They're supposed to all converge and split the rebellious heart of the revolution from the rest of the colonies. Howe doesn't leave New York. St. Regis doesn't make it very far. It's just Burgoyne. Burgoyne, after 800 miles in the wilderness, his supply trains not in too good of a shape. He loses. He's lost a whole lot of horses. The Hessian dragoons, they're only dragoons because that means horse cavalry. They're out of horses. They hear Bennington's got a whole lot of horses. So he sends General Baum with 2,400 Hessians, British Indian allies, to Bennington, towards Bennington. Really bad weather. Very, very hot. Very, very rainy. And as he gets closer and closer to Bennington, there's more and more organized opposition. He stops about 5 miles outside of Bennington. We have the Battle of Bennington, which isn't in Bennington or Vermont, it's in New York. Wasn't really fought by very many Vermonters at all. It was New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And all of Conway, all of the towns in this area, the Hessians are coming, they drop what they're doing, they run to there. And within a few days, they went from just a couple thousand soldiers in the area to 12,000, whatever. They were vastly outnumbered, the Hessians. And Ely goes there. And Ely, and I've never heard of this anywhere else. He didn't own enough land to be part of the Massachusetts militia. He went there just as a volunteer. And after the battle, he was court-martialed, even though he wasn't part of the army. But he was court-martialed for plunder, for retaining valuable plunder. And he defended himself in the trial, and the court published a transcript. Immediately after the August 19th Battle of Bennington, Mr. Samuel Ely, the preacher who was in the 2 bloody battles of Bennington, behaved with the greatest honor, valiantry, and courage in both actions. did when desire appear before the court in inquiry and make a handsome defense relative to the plunder he had taken. As he said, what he had taken was at the point of the sword as a volunteer for his groaning, bleeding country, and he further said he supported himself and lived upon his own money while in camp, was at no charge to his country, and the court being fully satisfied with what he did and what he says, they dismissed the charge. And citizens of Wilmington, Vermont also published something in the same newspaper, New London Gazette. We all know that General Stark said that if he had 5,000 such men as Mr. Samuel Ely, he would drive Burgoyne and his army to the devils. To the devil.
I heard that they were told that they could split the booty, but you haven't read that.
You know, there was a bunch of different units right there, and so when you go, some of them were much more professional than others, and the British defense, the Hessian defense, was very geographically widespread over a few miles. The center of it was called Hessian Hill. Mostly Hessians were there, but there was a whole bunch of significant garrisons established at what they thought were strong points. General Stark did a very complicated envelopment plan, which worked. Yeah, so one of the things, and I'm talking about this because when we get to Ely's Insurrection, which is soon, it's hard to comprehend why all these old Continental soldiers, grizzled war veterans, would really listen to the preacher at the courthouse steps telling them what to do. And this is why, because he had the bona fides, the street cred. And when he is at the courthouse steps, and one of the things that the 19th century historians, they ridiculed him. They said he wasn't a serious guy because he used the phrase, "We shall pay no more attention to the judges than we do puppies." And so he was ridiculed for that. But it turns out that that is a specific term of meaning to the Continental soldiers, that puppy was their name for the British light field artillery piece that could be towed by 4 guys. Because when you saw the flash, you dove to the ground. The ball was coming. But by the time you heard the sound, there was no more danger that it had already passed you. So you never had to pay attention to the bark of the British field artillery piece. So the Continental soldiers called them puppies. So he got a bad rap on that. Yeah. So I skipped ahead of the Broken Hints letter, which was the other thing which was 1774. Joseph Hawley to John Adams, as John Adams was going down to the Continental Congress. He wrote this amazing letter that John Adams would declare to be his most valuable possession. He would not give it up for all of the treasures of Harvard. And I reproduced it in the packet, but it is a roadmap for the attaining of independence. It was the earliest attempt to do anything like that. The editors of the John Adams paper called it the earliest, most perceptive, and most remarkably forthright recognition of what must be done to gain independence.
Is there an original that exists of that letter?
There is, but there is. There is. You can get it. You can view it in the John Adams Digital Papers collection. No, that's the letter. It should say Broken Hints before that. It's on that page in the middle of it, August 1774, Broken Hints letter. So it's a recipe for how to do it. And he was thinking grand strategy, that if you're going to do independence, what exactly does that mean? This is our red line. No direct British revenue attempts from the colonies. No parliamentary authority over the colonies. That it's essential that if we go to war now, we'll lose. We're not ready. All of us have to arm and train our soldiers. We have to guarantee a supply of gunpowder or shot or shell, or musket, etc. We need to hold off and get ready. And we need to unify as colonies. We need to start saying what the cause of one needs to be the cause of all. And he just goes through a laundry list of everything. And so when John Adams gets to Congress, he's showing this letter around. And Patrick Henry, the famous orator from Virginia, he shows Patrick Henry and he shouts so loud the whole room shuts up. And he shouts, "By God, I am of the mind of this man." And then everybody crowds around, the letter gets passed around, and this Broken Hints letter is the roadmap for American independence. Joseph Hawley wrote it in 1774, and nobody knows anything about it. So, yeah. So, skip ahead to 1780, the Massachusetts Constitution. Conway didn't like the Constitution. Neither did most other towns. Joseph Hawley didn't like the Constitution. And especially as compared to the other constitutions that were being developed right then. Pennsylvania's in 1779, written by Benjamin Franklin, was much more democratic than ours. There was no property requirements for voting. He made it explicitly illegal in the Article 1 of the first Pennsylvania Constitution for any person to have more money than they reasonably need to take care of their family. All surplus must be given to the community. He forbid the wearing of jewelry as ostentatious and against the concepts of our happy revolution. Far more democratic than what we came up with, which was huge requirements of wealth to hold office, to vote. The attendance at Conway Town Meeting plummets as soon as they pass it. And most importantly, the Continental soldiers from 1776 onwards, every Continental soldier was just a flat-out mercenary. The spirit of 76 came and went. From that point forward, it was professional soldiers. And they were almost uniformly paid in IOUs. And they get done with their service, they have scraps of paper that says the government will pay them back. The time for repayment comes and goes. And it's stalled and stalled, and the government is broke. The new Massachusetts legislature that comes into being in 1780 is composed of a guy named Len Richards, a professor at UMass, did great work on this, is composed, huge majority of it, by speculators, by people that were actively buying soldiers' IOUs. 40, 50 cents on the dollar, sometimes 10 cents on the dollar. They get into the legislature, they pass laws laying taxes on the citizenry for the full face value of all those IOUs. And it literally, and so the soldiers, the people in Ely's Insurrection 1782 were all Continental soldiers. And all of them had the same experience. And right away, they're writing letters, they're protesting. I've been forced to accept my army pay in notes. Nobody will accept them at face value. Now, because my family has to eat, I had to alienate them at 1/4 part of their original value. And now I'm being taxed to redeem the notes at full par value. Is that just? 3/4 of my money is going to the man who was sauntered at home during the war, enjoying the smiles of fortune, wallowing in affluence, and fattening in the sunshine of ease and prosperity that I made possible. If these securities are to be made good, let the hardy soldier, such as myself, who has withstood the vicissitudes of the war, receive what is no more than in fact is due. But they didn't do that. They had a bunch of different plans. They introduced legislation to print paper money. It never went anywhere. And so we get to, and by the way, that Constitution, Conway voted no. Initially, it was, they started discussing it in October of '79. John Adams writes it, he submits it, 3 days later he's on a boat to France, where he stays in France, Holland, and England for the next 8 years. And there was really, Joseph Hawley had this great relationship with John Adams. Nobody else really was listening to him. He objected to their failure to use the word free man in everything, like Pennsylvania had done. He saw it as correctly trying to protect the institution of slavery, even though the preamble that John Adams wrote, that all men are created equal, would eventually be used by the highest court in Massachusetts in '83 to outlaw slavery. But and what happened is, right after that first meeting, where all the delegates from the state, from the towns, 400 were there, the convention decides it needs a lot more work. The delegates go home, and then we have what may have been the worst winter in the history of New England. The only winter that New York Harbor froze solid, Boston Harbor froze solid. You couldn't get to Boston from here, from Western Mass. So they took advantage of that to start meeting again in February, when only 30-something towns were present out of the 300 towns in Massachusetts. And Samuel Adams, as the clerk of that convention, manufactured ways to turn previous no votes into yes votes. That's basically how we have a state constitution now. It's pretty much still the one that we have. And it was obtained by the even the proponents of it felt that it was a noble effort obtained by ignoble means. The elections of 1780, Hawley, you didn't run for office then. You were just elected. It was bad form to even declare yourself interested or a candidate. Hawley is elected to the state Senate. He refuses his Senate seat. He wrote this marvelous letter, a 20-page letter, the original's at Forbes, setting forth all of his objections to it. But the protests and the problems about that Constitution led directly to Ely's insurrection. So, and basically the soldiers' complaints never really stopped. They just intensified. It gets to the point where they're starting to have county conventions. All the towns are meeting. All the towns are meeting, especially in, so Hampshire County, we are part of Hampshire. Hampshire County at the time, before Berkshire County was set off in 1761, Hampshire County was what is now Hamden, Hampshire, Franklin, and Berkshire. So from the Connecticut state line to New Hampshire, Vermont state line, and to the New York line. And so, big area. So they're having these county conventions. They're writing as a group petitions to the general court and the legislature, saying, we need relief. It's not doable. February 4th, and where Conway is at the town meetings that are occurring every couple of weeks, nominates Samuel Ely and Abel Dinsmore and a couple others to repeatedly represent them at these county conventions. The one in February, Ely is arrested after demanding that the convention votes to close the courts. He's arrested for treasonable practices. The judge handling the case is Joseph Hawley. And Joseph Hawley decides that the offense is not serious enough to warrant the charge of treason. And he dismisses the case. March 29th, April there's additional additional county conventions. April, they start to gather, large amounts of soldiers start to gather in front of the Northampton courthouse. April 11th, the Conway Town mob. Conway Town meeting votes everybody present to adjourn the meeting and immediately reassemble on the steps of the courthouse in Northampton. 48 people signed it. I have the list of everybody. You think you might be related to them, I have a lot of information. Protests are going, I've done other talks on these insurrection. It was a major deal. War almost broke out. The militia that was called out by the government routinely switched over to the mob. And they had to call out Continental line soldiers from the Continental Army. There were several days, especially once it got to June, where 1,500 men in arms with artillery pieces are in front of the Northampton courthouse. Lively set-tos, severe injuries, and Ely is, after they did get into the courthouse, did disturb the court. Ely was first arrested for sedition. Sounds a little familiar to the January 6th people. He was convicted on May 6th, where as many as 3,000 people were there to try to rescue him. Strong number of Continental Army, field artillery, cavalry, the whole thing, kept him in irons. They took him down to Springfield, much bigger, much easier jail, much safer jail, bigger, further away from the seat of the rebellion, which numerous authors located as Conway. June 12th, and I have this in the packet. I love. I'm sorry, July.
June 12th.
Yeah, June 12th. So I love this because it's an actual eyewitness account of the breaking of Samuel Ely out of jail. And it's just, when you do this kind of work and you spend all this time in libraries, you rarely get like a really good eyewitness account, a participant in it that writes neutrally. In this case, Daniel Stebbins, a good Deerfield boy, probably 16, 17 years old at the time of this. He's writing this when he's in his 70s, reminiscences in the Franklin Gazette. He just talks about how the liberators, as they called themselves, they crossed the upper ferry, they halted as they entered the main street, they examined their muskets to be certain that all was in order. They made towards the jail 2 deep when they found Captain Thomas Dwight, who had collected a small company of boys, youth, law students, clerks, parading single file with shouldered muskets on the opposite side of the street in front of the jail. Still as mice, leaving ample space for the liberators, who scarcely deigned to notice the featherbed collection under the command of Captain Dwight. A few sturdy liberators dismounted and with axes in hand rushed into the jailhouse without opposition or even a question, "Why do you do so?" They hastened to the narrow passage which led to the jail door, against which the axes were hurled in rapid succession. The massive oak and iron bolted doors gave way and the walls resounded with, "Ely, you are free." With joyful acclamation, Ely rushes into the arms of his deliverers. He springs for the street door, gives a few hearty shakes of the hand, mounts a spare horse, is presented with a large wooden bottle drawn from the sallow fag, and in true farmer style, drew forth the cobstopple, wiped the bunghole, and I never heard the term bunghole except for, what was the cartoon? Beavis and Butthead. They used to say bung. So the bunghole, wiped the bunghole with the palm of his hand and took a delicious swig of something which appeared palatable. The presumption is that it was something alcoholic. When Parson Ely had taken quantum sufficit, you're the Latin expert, Lord. Quantum sufficit?
How do you spell it? Sufficient quantity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of the good elixir the command was given. Already, then right about face, then march, and off they rode northward to the places from whence they came. I love that stuff, sorry. But that's really when the insurrection really began, because the Continental Army's troops, they tried to intercept him as he came to Conway, and for 4 straight days. So during this time, Hawley is writing dispatches every few days to the Boston governor, letting him know what's going on. He's completely freaked out. They think war's going to break out. They think the revolution might be over. That we might have to, Britain might decide to keep fighting. And the governor responds by, first thing, of course, suspends the right of habeas corpus. So you can't petition the government for wrongs. Second thing is he declares a bounty on the head of 3 active duty Continental soldiers, 2 of whom were from Conway, Captain Abel Dinsmore, Lieutenant Perez Barkwell. The third, Lieutenant Paul King, his brother, John King, is buried in Conway. Colonel Porter, the High Sheriff, was the commanding officer of the Massachusetts line. Just a couple of years before that, Abel Dinsmore was his captain, Perez Barkwell was his lieutenant. And that was after George Washington segregated the lodging and the eating the eats and sleeps of officers from enlisted men. So you were with your fellow officers exclusively the whole time. So they would have known each other really well. And now they're each leading 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 armed men. And the position of the government of Porter is, give us Ely. And they said no. And whether or not Porter broke the faith, during a parley, Porter had Bardwell, Dinsmore, and King seized and placed in the jail and said, you can't get out until you give us Ely. That caused the riots to intensify, the hand-to-hand fighting to intensify. Nobody ended up getting killed, but there are a lot of serious injuries. And along comes Reuben Dickinson with 1,000 men from Amherst and Pelham. And Reuben Dickinson would be very active in Shays as well. So was Dinsmore, so was Barlow. But the Dickinson's brother was Nathaniel Dickinson, the great-great-grandfather of the poet that we all like.
What was the principle that the folks were all disagreeing with each other on?
So the principle was, can you redress your grievances through protest, or must grievances be redressed through the ballot box? The actual arguments were the same as what you hear now. You hear now people protesting, other people saying, well, if you don't like this country, just leave it. It was the same exact thing then. And they were saying, well, why is your perception so black and white? Why can't we just have modifications to our Constitution? Why can't we have alterations to the law to make the laws more equitable? And so it was really the same arguments that go on now. So
Ely was representing you have a right to protest?
Yeah, that you've ignored us for so long. What else are we going to do? You keep saying you're going to do something. It's been 2 years. There's nothing done. We're broke. We're starving. They just had a court session where 240 cases, 239 of them were for debt. 238 of them were for Continental soldiers in debt. All because their IOUs were worthless. They were paid nothing. And they're getting taxed to repay to speculators 100% of face value. It's nuts. Of course they're going to riot. We're lucky to have made it out of that situation, honestly. And Hawley is one of the reasons why we did. Because, Hawley wrote 5 or 6 letters to the governor. I included the last letter that he wrote, June 24th, in the packet, because it ended up being really the last letter that he wrote to the government of the state of Massachusetts in his life. but, and it's because he had heard that Boston, that Sam Adams in particular, wanted to, sending emissaries to George Washington to say, can you send your whole army out, conquer Western Mass, teach them a lesson. We can't have this. And so Hawley was really freaked out that they wouldn't submit, that the old soldiers in Western Mass would not submit, and we would have a flat-out war. And B, that doesn't know if America can survive it. And so he urges that a committee of the wisest, most sensible, most patient legislators come out to Western Mass and explain to the people what their taxes are being used for, why the difficulties exist that are current. And so as soon as, and so I included that June 24th letter in the packet. And first of all, it reveals that Hawley knows Abel Dinsmore from Conway. Second of all, it shows that he's talking about how many of the people in the proportion is he says he knows that the proportion is 2/3 of the people in all these towns that are in favor of the protesters and will fight the government. And that he agrees with them, that their grievances are correct, that they're valid, that you can't just respond to it with brute force. It's not going to work. And he declares that the people of the highlands of this country are, I'm going to mangle this, well, you can help me out with it, fervidum genus hominum. So Barb, the proprietor of the Conway Inn, she answers all the Latin questions in Jeopardy, right? She says that means seething mad group of people. So I thought that should be the slogan, the slogan of Conway.
Say it again, please.
Fervidum genus hominum.
But what does it mean again?
Seething mad group of people. Yeah, I like that too. So he's saying send a committee out, go to all the towns, deal with this by talking to them. Because what happened was they couldn't, after a few days, Ely took off, and Dickinson, Lieutenant Dickinson, with all the Amherst men, was persuaded to go into the jail and interview, and they were treating Dinsmore and his companions well. Porter went in there, agreed to release everybody. Everybody pretty much went home, and things settled down enough to send the committee out, and that's where Samuel Adams comes to Conway. So I included the original letter that he wrote while in Conway.
Is Hawley, Mass. named after Joseph Hawley?
It is. So are many, many Hawley streets, many Hawley elementary schools. So the letter that he wrote here, so the committee that they sent out was Samuel Adams, Nathaniel Gorham, Artemus Ford, three of the most well-known legislators in the town. And there was one, Nathaniel Gorham, he was a speculator. He refused to serve in the army. His mentor was Elbert Jerry, but during there's a quote from him that I love, I gotta give it. 1788, during the debate over the U.S. Constitution, he made an argument so he made an argument when he was observing that the Constitution did not forbid a permanent standing federal army, which means that we were going to, generals can't general without an army. So we were going to have a permanent standing army in the United States. He was opposed to that. So he made the argument that the establishment of a permanent standing, i.e. erect, army is the same as a standing or erect penis, which is never a recipe for legislative success. But but he said, because it's an excellent assurance of domestic tranquility, but a dangerous temptation of foreign adventure. So yeah, that's Nathaniel Bourne. But he was a land speculator. He would end up going broke from buying way too much land that he didn't really have money to pay for.
Where was that quote from?
That quote is from Samuel Morson, Oxford History of the American People, Volume 1, page 398.
Who said it?
Nathaniel Gorham, Gorha. So Artemus Ward was a general early on, from 75 on, in the Continental Army, lawyer, judge, became very close to General George Washington. When he came through Northampton, he was left dismayed by the heckling that greeted him because they came from Boston in a fancy new coach. And somebody yelled out, "Soldier's blood makes great varnish." But they come to Conway, and we wouldn't. They chair the town meeting, and we wouldn't talk to them. We knew that they were there to identify the ringleaders, try to find someone responsible, and maybe throw them in jail. So we told them we would only talk to them in a county convention. So the letter is him actually writing to Ashfield, saying Conway will only confer with us in a county convention, and we have no objection to tarrying in the county for a week or so for that purpose. So he was such a politician, it really wasn't true. He very much had an objection. So he wrote to, I included a letter from, a page from his early biography, where it collates like all of the letters to Sam Adams that he's writing and at the time. And he's writing that he's being made to go to one of these pestilential county conventions. And that the religious and political settlement that we made in our Constitution of 1780 is not democratic enough in the opinions of these geniuses from Western Mass. So yeah, he says one thing to your face and another thing to your body. Typical. And then as for Samuel Ely, he skedaddles out from Sheriff Porter's grasp, goes straight to Vermont. Vermont in July of 1702 just declared itself to be an independent republic. It's lasted 6 years. Samuel Ely immediately parks himself on the Wilmington Town Green and starts loudly protesting the Vermont government, saying the first act that they did was to tax people. The new act taxing farmers directly for their land is a damnable act. I have a constitution in my pocket, and he waves the Bible, it's better than the one you had, etc., etc. So they arrest him. They charge him with impious conduct. And they have their very first criminal trial in Vermont, September 1782, in the Republic of Vermont. He's convicted. He's sentenced to be banished. They take him to the border with Massachusetts. Guess who's waiting for him? Sheriff Porter. Sheriff Porter conveys him directly to the Boston jail, far beyond the reach of his friends in Western Mass. In March, he petitions the governor, Hancock, for his release. I included this because his petition gives an idea of his florid use of language. I am alive, and that is all, as I am full of boils and putrefied sores all over my body. They make me stink alive, besides having some of my feet froze, makes it difficult to walk. You know, P.S. I am so raw that I have not been able to wear any breeches for above a month. And they say, you know, if you can find someone to post the bond of £1,000, which we'll let you out. And they did. His brother Abner, a wealthy merchant, he tended to be from a great wealthy family in Lyme, Connecticut. And they posted the bond. And then, so the, sort of the last pages, the last that we hear, so Samuel Ely continues to protest. He's released from jail. He goes up to Maine. He protests against the owner of almost all the land in Maine, which was the former General Henry Knox. His wife, Lucy Knox, inherited the Waldo patent, the largest single royal land holding in all the colonies.
Is that the Knox,
and
Knox that was from the Revolutionary War that brought the cannons through?
Exactly. And people were just going up there and settling, building houses, no surveys, no deed, no nothing. And Knox gets a hold of it and decides to send all these agents out to make people pay for their land. Wasn't going well. It was a lot of Samuel Ely was right in the middle of all that. We go all the way up to 1796, 97. Knox gets a warrant for Samuel Ely's arrest again. Ely is warned by a friendly local sheriff. Ely flees westward. But before he does, he submits a petition to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and just the title, I love. Last petition of an innocent man, a plaintive worm, involved in one continual round of distress, miseries, and torture. Or a man persecuted in the bowels of a free republic by a systematic junta of luxurious sons, patentee land jobbers, and voluptuous jowls. Man had a way with the pen. But that's the last we heard of him. I could not. There's all these biographies actually that say he died long before 1797, but he did. He submitted a petition to them. So where he ended up, nobody knows. I don't know. I really spent a lot of time trying to find out.
Did you say he went out west? Is that what you said?
Well, relatives of his founded the town of Ely, Minnesota, which is the biggest port on Lake Superior, the big iron port in Lake Superior. Joseph Hawley, I included something in the packet because Joseph Hawley, see, he would absent himself regularly. 1776 to 1780, shut in. Shows up 2 more years, 80 to 82, and then 82 to 88, shortly before he died in 88, he writes a long broadside against the U.S. Constitution. And then he passes away with his wife Mercy taking care of him in the dark, curtains drawn. So he writes, and this was just found 30 or 40 years ago at a book sale. He owned a copy of Cicero's Orations in Latin, and somebody bought it, and they found in the margins. He said, I am lost as to all matters which are deemed matters of judgment, my memory extremely broken, embarrassed about religion, all courage, spirit, motive, or spring of action, or whatsoever it was which formerly animated me, and which now keep the world alive and in motion, absolutely extinguished. Oh, piteous case. No more prospect of being restored to my former state of enjoyment, capacity for business, and other action than when a limb of the body is amputated that another will grow out in its stead. So that's his description of his own mental health. To me, that's clinical depression. I'm not a doctor. But that's, so, and to me, it's, when I was down in New York a few weeks ago visiting my son, I saw graffiti on the side of the building, large piece of graffiti, and it said, America, why do you always forget about your broken people? Just thought, that might answer the question about why we've forgotten about Joseph Hawley. So that's my closing thought. And I just think the guy deserves to be remembered. He really does. He was a giant. His colleagues, his contemporaries thought he was the man. And Nothing. The people in Northampton don't know about him. He left every penny to the city of Northampton to build schools. There's a Hawley Elementary School. People there don't know about Joseph Hawley. So it's just stunning. So that's on a mission to let people know about Joseph Hawley.